It only showed once and will never happen again. There were no repeats, lists, or explanations. There is no longer a record of an episode of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and no one at NBC is talking about it. For decades, late-night lore has been filled with rumors of a bad guest appearance, meltdowns backstage, and a network rush to hide it. What did really happen that night? And why does NBC still try so hard to hide it? That which is about to be said could change how you remember Johnny Carson and the show that made him famous. It began on The Tonight Show like any other night. The well-known screen moved. As the band played its jazzy intro, Johnny Carson walked onto the stage with the laid-back cool that made him famous on late nights. But for a few people who watched on a quiet evening in the middle of the 1880s, something wasn't right. What they saw has since become one of the strangest unsolved riddles on TV. The following episode aired. In just a few places before, it suddenly disappeared without a trace. It was never shown again. It was never added to the public records. But NBC has still never told us what really happened. A few people thought it was just a glitch. Some people thought it was a mistake with the schedule. But people who were there told a different story, one that NBC didn't want the public to know. On the surface, the night's party list looked like any other. He was a well-known actor on TV, singer and comedian who often appeared on Carson's couch. The first guest, though, changed everything. According to different eyewitness reports and a few now-deleted online posts, that guest was clearly drunk. One person in the crowd, who later spoke on the podcast without giving his name, said that the man walked onto the stage like he owned it and then started saying things that made everyone hold their breath. Carson tries to start the segment in a strange way, steer the talk, but it was clear that something was wrong. The guest slurred his words, kept cutting Carson off, and reportedly blurted out stories about famous people in the entertainment business. There are some stories that should never have been shown live on TV. One backstage worker said that one claim was so ridiculous that a production helper stepped forward as if to stop the show, but the cameras kept rolling, at least for a while. It was said that the show's feed went out in some places not long into the interview. A lot of other affiliates quickly turned to reruns or local news. In just a few hours, NBC started getting calls from confused watchers, and then nothing. There was no record of the show in the official broadcast logs. Carson never brought it up again. The story of the Lost Tonight Show episode only got bigger over the years. But the chaos people saw on TV was nothing compared to what happened right before the show started. Behind the scenes at NBC's Burbank studio, something terrible was happening even though the cameras weren't on and the crowd hadn't taken their seats yet. Tonight, show tapes that night were meant to be normal, but staff members later said, off the record and years later, that they saw it quickly turn into a slow-moving disaster that no one could stop. The trouble began with the first guest of the night, a famous singer who was at the height of his fame in the late 1970s. He was charming, and he was known to enjoy a little too much. Someone who used to work on the show and spoke privately on a podcast in the early 2000s said that the actor was over an hour late and clearly tired. He spoke in a jumbled way. He smelled like booze, and people who saw him in the hallway said he was slurring his words when telling jokes. Johnny Carson, who is generally cool and collected, did not like it. He had a rule about being professional on his show for a long time, especially after a few episodes where drunk guests got out of hand. And Carson had already been patient with this actor once, during a tense interview that finished in awkward silence. Some people say that Johnny only agreed to have him back because NBC bosses put on him to. Some say it was meant to be a comeback to make things right. It turned out to be a nightmare instead. Only a few minutes before the recording was set to start, there was a fight in Carson's locker room. According to a backstage worker who did not want to be named, Carson talked to the actor privately and threatened to cancel the whole piece. Reports say that the guest got angry and said he was fine, demanding that the show must go on. Crew members in the hallway could hear the fight through the door because it got so loud. Carson is said to have rushed off in a fit of anger, telling the managers that it would be their fault if the guest lost it on stage. Everyone wasn't sure what to do. Everyone had been given a ticket. The band was set up. People were already being seated, and NBC didn't have a new guest ready. Even though there was a lot of tension, the taping went ahead. This may have been because NBC executives were afraid of bad news or making the guest's agent angry. Everyone in the room would be shocked by what came next. People cheered as Johnny Carson walked out, but the tension in the air was not hidden by his normal charm. There was something off about the show right from the start. It didn't feel right. Carson's speech was not as long as usual. His normal back and forth with the band or Ed McMahon didn't happen this time. Instead, he quickly introduced his first guest. That's when things started to go wrong. The guest left with a fake smile and eyes that didn't seem to be seeing anything. Most people who watched him live thought he looked a little off, like he was nervous or busy. The people behind the scenes knew there was more going on, though. He started talking as soon as he sat down next to Carson. He talked about Hollywood, old co-stars, and the stress of fame even before Johnny asked a question. The crowd laughed at first because they weren't sure if this was all part of the show. But as the minutes went by, it became clear that this wasn't a show. It was an accident. Out of the blue, the guest made a rude joke about a big Hollywood executive who was still working at the time. They then named a famous actress in a strange, slurred story that Carson tried to cut off in the middle of. When Johnny asked the guest if he wanted to talk about something lighter, he shook his head and said, "No, let's tell them how it really is." The crowd stopped laughing and was stunned. Then there was the moment that decided the end of the story. A guest leaned in close and spoke into the mic, but Carson's body language changed right away because of how close the guest was. He moved around in his seat, raised his eyes, and looked away from the camera as if he needed help. He didn't answer. He just sat there with his lips pressed together and his face hidden. For the few people who saw it in real life, that picture will never be forgotten. Soon after, the show cut to an ad in the middle of a sentence without warning. In some time zones, it came back with a different person already sitting on the couch. In other cases, the episode finished too soon. People who recorded it on VHS saw weird jumps and parts that were missing. NBC affiliates across the country were told right away to stop airing the show again, and no one gave an answer in the days that followed. There were only stories left. Some people said the guest exposed a huge business secret. Others said he made threats against them or revealed something legally risky. No one has ever said for sure what exact moment the shutdown began. No matter what it was, Johnny Carson was clearly upset because of what he did in the days that followed shocked even those closest to him. The Tonight Show was no longer on NBC's radar by the next morning. There were no more episodes, no teasers, and not even a summary on their press feed. This was a big change for a network that usually showed Johnny Carson every night, and fans noticed right away. People called their local affiliates to ask why the episode finished so quickly. Some people wrote letters to NBC asking for answers, but all they got back was silence. There was no sound. But behind the scenes, the network was anything but calm. According to former NBC employees who spoke on the record but asked to remain anonymous, a lot of internal notes and hush orders started going around just hours after the show. One person who used to work as a help in the Burbank office remembered getting a call before she even got to her desk. "Don't talk about the show last night with anyone. If anyone asks, it was a mistake with the schedule." It was sent to stations all over the country with that statement. Documents that came to light decades later through a leak on a forum that no longer exists say that NBC executives saw the show as an internal threat and ordered that it be removed from the tape library right away. One memo even said, "No duplicate, no rerun, no archive." That was very rare, especially for Carson's show, which was very well organized. A lot of shows were saved in their entirety, but this one was not given any attention. The technicians were told to get rid of the master copy. The standard thing to do in an emergency, but it's not used very often. A second-hand source says that the editor, who was there that night, paused. He knew that the video could be useful at some point. There are reports that a second, unofficial copy was sneaked out before it was deleted. NBC never confirmed it, but since then, pieces of the episode have shown up in obscure web auctions and collector forums. A longtime Tonight Show archivist was secretly moved just 2 weeks after the event, which was one of the stranger turns. He had been taking care of the show's huge collection of tapes for more than 10 years. His co-workers say that he tried to keep a private record of what happened. His firing came out of the blue and had no formal explanation. Even Johnny Carson's own staff wouldn't say anything. Producers and writers were told not to talk about the event in any way, not even informally. Over time, people who tried to dig deeper were either pushed out or quietly left the group. The word Carson blackout was used all the time in the NBC hallways, a warning not to look around too much where a line had been made by the network. The Tonight Show's own records for that week are missing an entry, which may be the most telling thing of all. One episode number skip will never be shown again. There is a blank spot in the formal records where there should have been a full show. But Johnny Carson would never let something like that go by without a word. After a few weeks, he told someone something they didn't expect. The missing show wasn't talked about in public for weeks. As NBC had planned, it was like the night had been erased from history. Then, Johnny Carson did something out of character during a quiet monologue in the middle of a low-key show. He gave a brief hint that things were not what they seemed to be. That night, the speech was all about cancel culture, which didn't even have a name yet. Carson made jokes about things you used to be able to say on TV, then stopped to let the laughs die down. He said, "Of course," as if it were nothing. He smiled in a way that was hard to read and looked off to the side. Some things are better left forgotten. Ed McMahon laughed, but the event didn't end as quickly as it should have. It was a subtle but clear sign for people who remembered the strange event from a few weeks ago. Johnny also remembered. People who worked with Carson at the time later said that what happened that night made him feel very uneasy. One former staff writer said that Johnny told them behind closed doors that he had never lost control of an interview like that before, and that he had asked NBC not to show the episode again. That's not the whole story, though. Some stories say Carson wanted to include the episode in a Lost Tapes special he had planned for many years later. NBC reportedly flatly refused, reminding him that the tape had been destroyed. What little changed in Carson's behavior after that episode was clear. He became a little more careful with his approach. The more dangerous jokes were toned down. He talked over people more, quickly when they went in an unknown direction. His friends noticed that he became more private and guarded, even behind the scenes. Some people thought that the experience had shook him up as a person as well as an actor. Then there's Carson's collection. Nobody was surprised when Johnny kept copies of many of his favorite shows in a secret place. Some trusted assistants said the lost show might have been kept there without NBC's knowledge. But after Carson's death in 2005, his estate allegedly blocked access to those tapes, turning down all requests from researchers, documentary filmmakers, and even NBC. As of now, there is no official Carson collection that has any footage from the show. It's the only episode from the later years of the show for which there are no known clips, still pictures, or transcripts. That man's absence says a lot about how he helped shape a whole age of TV. But even after the story stopped being talked about, one person never seemed to get better. The person who was the center of attention, all. After the broadcast went away, everyone looked in silence at the guy who had set the night on fire, but no one dared to say his name in public. Even though NBC wouldn't say who the guest was, anonymous tips, rumor networks, and old schedules could help narrow it down. And people who were paying attention could not ignore the damage. People used to know this actor's name. A lot of people liked his movies, and in the 1970s and early 1980s, he was a regular on TV. But soon after the episode aired, even if it was only for a short time, strange and sudden things started to go wrong with his job. The film has dried up. A network show that he was supposedly working on was canceled for no clear reason. He stopped going out in public very often, and when he did, he seemed detached and guarded. There was a vague article in a tabloid at the time about a TV meltdown that made hints of a late-night episode that led to a blacklisting. Fans put together the puzzle even though no names were written. One reporter said that a big company had dropped out of a project after being told by people who run networks. It is known in the business that the actor's agent suddenly fired him without giving a reason. The man's link to The Tonight Show was completely deleted, which makes the whole thing even stranger. There are no public guest lists for that season that have his name on them. Old clips of his interviews that had been shown over and over again for years were quietly taken down from syndication. When he was with Johnny Carson, it was like someone had gone back and erased all evidence of it. The star never talked about the incident in public. After more than a decade, he gave a rare interview. When asked about his time on The Tonight Show, he got angry. He was firm. "I don't talk about that." Everyone made sure I paid for that big mistake, and his tone showed that he was afraid as well as sorry. It's even scarier what turned up in his unfinished book. Years after he dropped out of the public eye online, parts of a rough biography were made public. It was said that one chapter, which was never released, was called "The Night That Ruined Me." It talked about an embarrassing event involving betrayal, drug use, and a popular TV host, but the details were not clear. But some people think it was a confession. Some people who saw the last twist think it was a warning. Then there was the last twist. The actor had almost disappeared for years, but after a while, conspiracy sites started linking him to a series of scandals that had been going on behind the scenes in Hollywood. Some people thought that what he said on Carson had revealed something bigger that powerful people wanted to hide. It's hard to say if that was true or just part of the growing story. One thing is for sure, though. His job never got better. People who tried to tell his side of the story were often shut up as well. Still, pieces of that night wouldn't stay hidden, and parts of the lost episodes started to surface, even though NBC tried their best to stop them. Come back.